alien girl branded at the DNA level like cattle. Only the human cleared her mark. The stench of recycled air and unwashed bodies filled the cramped cargo hold of the Vexillian slave transport. Eric West pressed his back against the cold metal wall, trying to ignore the burning in his wrists where the restraints had chafed his skin raw. The ship shuddered violently, throwing several captives against each other as emergency klaxons began to wail. "What the hell is happening?" Eric muttered, straining to see through the dimly lit compartment. A voice cut through the chaos, feminine but strong, with an accent he couldn't quite place. "The ship's under attack. This might be our only chance." Eric turned toward the sound and found himself staring at a woman with striking features that were almost human, but not quite. Her skin had a subtle amber hue that seemed to shimmer faintly in the emergency lighting. Her eyes, large and expressive, held an otherworldly quality, with irises that shifted between deep violet and midnight blue. Despite the dire circumstances, there was something undeniably captivating about her. "Chance for what?" Eric asked, wincing as another impact rocked the ship. "Freedom," she replied simply, nodding toward the door panel that was now sparking and malfunctioning. "The security systems are failing." As if on cue, the electromagnetic locks on their restraints suddenly deactivated with a soft click. The cargo bay doors slid partially open, jamming halfway. Eric didn't hesitate. Military training kicked in as he assessed the situation with practiced efficiency. "Everyone who can move, head for the escape pods," he shouted, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command. Chaos erupted as prisoners scrambled toward the exit. Eric grabbed the alien woman's arm. "Stay close. I know these Vexillian layouts." She nodded, following him as they navigated through panicked bodies and flashing emergency lights. Eric led her through service corridors, avoiding the main passageways where security would be concentrated. "I'm Eric, by the way," he said as they ducked into a maintenance shaft. "Sora," she replied, her breath coming in short gasps as they ran. "Sora Neros." They reached the escape pod bay just as another explosion rocked the ship. Only one pod remained, its hatch still sealed. "In!" Eric commanded, punching the release code he'd memorized during his time in the Terran fleet. The hatch opened with a hydraulic hiss. They tumbled inside and Eric slammed his palm against the launch sequence. The pod detached with a violent jerk, sending them spinning into the void of space. Through the viewport, they watched as the massive slave transport broke apart. Secondary explosions consuming its hull. "Holy shit," Eric breathed, running a hand through his short dark hair. "We actually made it." Sora said nothing, her eyes fixed on the burning ship. Her expression was unreadable. Eric turned to the navigation console. "We're in luck. There's a trade hub about 6 hours from here, Nexus Station. We can blend in there, figure out our next move." When Sora remained silent, Eric finally took a moment to really look at her. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her slender fingers tracing a pattern on her forearm. As she pushed up her sleeve, Eric noticed a strange, iridescent marking on her skin. Intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow, like liquid metal embedded beneath her skin. "What is that?" he asked, gesturing toward the marking. Sora's expression darkened. "My brand," she said quietly. "Oh, every Alturian owned by the Vexillian Trading Consortium carries one." "A tattoo?" Eric asked, leaning closer. She shook her head. It's a genetic marker, encoded directly into my DNA. It identifies me as property, tracks my location, monitors my vital signs." Her voice grew bitter. "Even marks which breeding line I belong to." Eric felt his stomach turn. "That's barbaric." "That's business," Sora replied flatly, "and it's why I can't go to Nexus Station with you." "What? Why not?" Sora looked at him, her otherworldly eyes filled with resignation. "Because every security checkpoint, every scanner, every official database in consortium space will recognize this marker. The moment I pass through any security gate, I'll be flagged as escaped property and returned to my owner." She gestured helplessly at the marking. "I'm branded at the genetic level, Eric, like cattle. There's no disguising it, no hiding it. I escaped that ship, but I'm still not free." Eric stared at her, the full implications sinking in. "Then we'll find another way," he said firmly. "There has to be a way to remove it or mask it." "There isn't," Sora said, but something in Eric's determined expression made her pause. At least none that I know of. Eric turned back to the navigation console, his jaw set in a hard line. Then we'll have to find someone who does know. I didn't just escape a Vexillian slave ship to hand you back to those bastards. For the first time since they'd met, Sora's expression softened. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Eric met her gaze steadily. Because no sentient being should be treated like property, and because I've seen enough injustice in this galaxy to last several lifetimes. He offered her a small, crooked smile. Besides, what else am I going to do with my newfound freedom? The escape pod hurtled through space, a tiny speck against the vast darkness, carrying two fugitives bound by circumstance and an uncertain future. As Nexus Station grew larger in their viewport, Eric began formulating a plan, one that would challenge the very foundations of an empire built on the ownership of beings like Sora. The escape pod's limited life support system hummed softly as Eric adjusted their course, avoiding major shipping lanes where Vexillian patrols might be searching. Sora sat cross-legged on the floor, studying a star chart projected from the pod's navigation system. The outer rim is our best bet, Eric said, pointing to a cluster of systems beyond consortium jurisdiction. Lawless, dangerous, but no genetic scanners checking every person who walks through a door. Sora nodded, her violet blue eyes reflecting the holographic stars. I've heard stories about a scientist, Dr. Elias Vorn. He was conducting research on genetic manipulation before the consortium exiled him. You think he could help with your... Eric gestured toward her forearm. It's possible. His work focused on reversing permanent genetic modifications. She traced the shimmering pattern on her skin. The consortium feared his research would undermine their entire slave economy. Eric leaned back in his seat, studying her. The emergency lighting cast soft shadows across her features, highlighting the subtle alien qualities that made her both familiar and exotic. Her resilience impressed him. Most beings would have broken under the weight of what she'd endured. How long? He asked quietly. How long what? How long were you their property? Sora's expression hardened. 7 standard years. I was captured during a raid on my homeworld when I was 20. Her fingers curled into a fist. My people aren't warriors. We're scholars, artists, healers. We had no defense against their ships. Eric felt a surge of anger. My planet signed treaties with the consortium. They promised to respect human autonomy, yet they've been taking people from border colonies for decades. My transport had at least 30 humans aboard. The consortium only respects profit, Sora said bitterly, and there's good money in exotic slaves. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Eric checked their fuel reserves, barely enough to reach the nearest outer rim outpost. We'll need supplies, he said, changing the subject. Credits, food, new identities. I don't have anything, Sora admitted. Eric grinned. I wouldn't be so sure. He reached into his boot and pulled out a small data chip. Swipe this from a guard during transit. Access codes to a consortium supply cache on Nexus Station. Sora's eyes widened. That's impressive. 5 years in Terran Special Forces before I was captured. They taught us to always secure resources. His smile faded. Though I never imagined I'd be using those skills like this. The pod's temperature regulation was failing, the small cabin growing noticeably colder. Sora shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. Here, Eric said, shrugging off his outer jacket and offering it to her. I'm fine, she insisted. You're shivering. Take it. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted the jacket, pulling it around her shoulders. It engulfed her slender frame, but she visibly relaxed as warmth enveloped her. Thank you, she said softly. It's nothing. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a moment of connection that transcended their different species and circumstances. Eric felt an unexpected flutter in his chest, a pull toward her that went beyond mere sympathy or duty. Sora seemed to sense it too. She looked away first, her cheeks flushing a deeper amber. Tell me about Earth, she said, clearly changing the subject. They've only heard stories. Eric leaned back, grateful for the distraction from his unexpected feelings. It's beautiful. Oceans that stretch beyond the horizon. Forests so dense you can walk for days without seeing the sky. Cities that shine like stars at night. It sounds wonderful. It has its problems, like anywhere. But it's home. He paused. What about your world? Alturia, right? Sora's expression softened with nostalgia. Crystalline cities built into mountain faces. Bioluminescent forests. Our architecture follows the natural flow of the landscape. We believe in harmony with our environment rather than domination of it. I'd like to see it someday, Eric said. Perhaps you will, she replied, though her tone suggested she doubted either of them would live long enough for such luxuries. The pod's warning system beeped, indicating they were approaching an asteroid field. Eric turned his attention back to navigation, expertly guiding them through the debris. His military training was evident in his precise movements and calm demeanor under pressure. Sora watched him work, studying the strong line of his jaw, the focused intensity in his eyes. Humans were rare in the part of the space where she'd been kept, and she found herself fascinated by his differences, the warmth of his skin, the determined set of his shoulders, the unexpected gentleness in hands clearly trained for combat. You're staring, Eric said without looking away from the controls. Sora didn't deny it. Human physiology is interesting. Is that a scientific observation? There was a hint of teasing in his voice. Partially, she admitted, but also personal curiosity. The pod shuddered as a small asteroid grazed their hull. Eric compensated smoothly, his hands dancing across the controls. The close call left them both breathing harder, adrenaline coursing through their systems. When the danger passed, Eric turned to find Sora much closer than before, thrown toward him by the impact. Their faces were inches apart, her breath warm against his skin. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly husky. "Yes," she whispered, making no move to increase the distance between them. The confined space of the pod seemed to shrink further, charged with attention neither had anticipated. Eric found himself noticing details he'd missed before, the subtle pattern of barely visible markings along her temples, the way her pupils expanded slightly as she looked at him. Sora reached out hesitantly, her fingertips brushing against his cheek with a touch so light it might have been imagined. "Your species is remarkably adaptable," she murmured. "Even in the worst circumstances, you find ways to survive, to fight back." "We're stubborn that way," Eric replied, acutely aware of her touch, of the strange, sweet scent that seemed to emanate from her skin. "It's admirable," she said. "Among my people, such determination is attractive." The word hung between them, loaded with meaning. Eric felt his pulse quicken, surprised by the intensity of his response to this woman who wasn't even human. Yet in that moment, the differences between them seemed insignificant compared to their shared humanity, or whatever the universal equivalent might be. The navigation console beeped again, breaking the spell. Eric reluctantly turned his attention back to their course, clearing his throat. "We should reach the outer rim in about 12 hours, he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You should try to get some rest. I'll wake you when we're close." Sora nodded, moving back to her side of the pod, still wrapped in his jacket. "What about you?" "I'll sleep later. Someone needs to keep watch." As Sora settled into an uncomfortable position against the wall, Eric focused on the stars beyond the viewport, trying to ignore the lingering warmth where her fingers had touched his skin. Whatever was happening between them was unexpected and complicated, and potentially dangerous given their circumstances. Yet as he glanced at her curled form, already drifting into exhausted sleep, he couldn't deny the protective instinct that surged through him, stronger than mere duty or principle. Somehow in the span of mere hours, her freedom had become as important to him as his own. The pod continued its journey toward the outer rim, carrying them toward an uncertain future, and the slim hope offered by a rogue scientist who might hold the key to Sora's freedom, if they could find him. Helios Station hung in space like a tarnished coin, its once gleaming hull now pockmarked with makeshift repairs and unauthorized additions. The escape pod's thrusters sputtered as Eric guided them toward a public docking bay, avoiding the official ports where identification would be required. "Charming place," Eric muttered as they approached. "Remember, on stations like this, everyone's running from something. Keep your head down and follow my lead." Sora nodded, adjusting the high-collared jacket Eric had given her to ensure her genetic brand remained covered. "What's our story?" "Bonded pair looking for work," Eric replied without hesitation. keeps questions to a minimum, and explains why we're traveling together. Bonded? Sora asked, her brow furrowing. Married, mated, whatever term works for your species. A slight flush darkened Sora's amber cheeks. I understand the concept. The pod docked with a metallic clang, and Eric gathered their meager supplies. Ready? As I'll ever be. They stepped into the chaotic atmosphere of Helios Station, immediately assaulted by a cacophony of sounds, smells, and sights. The main concourse teemed with species from across the galaxy. Merchants hawking questionable goods, mercenaries lounging against walls with weapons prominently displayed, and beings of all descriptions going about their business with the wary alertness of those living outside the law. Eric placed his hand at the small of Sora's back, guiding her through the crowd with practiced ease. The casual intimacy of the gesture wasn't lost on either of them, but it served their cover, and if Eric was honest with himself, satisfied a growing desire to be close to her. We need information and supplies, he murmured close to her ear, and a better ship. Credits first, Sora replied, her breath warm against his neck as she leaned in to speak. Your data chip? Eric nodded toward a dingy establishment with a flickering sign that read the event horizon. Best place to fence stolen data. Stay close. The bar was dimly lit and surprisingly quiet compared to the concourse outside. Various beings hunched over drinks or engaged in hushed conversations, barely glancing up as they entered. Eric led them to the bar where a four-armed humanoid was methodically polishing glasses. What'll it be? The bartender asked, two arms continuing to clean while the others rested on the counter. Information, Eric replied, sliding the data chip partially into view. And a fair exchange? The bartender's eyes narrowed. Back room, ask for Tavik. They weaved through the tables toward a door at the rear of the establishment. Before they reached it, a hulking figure stepped into their path. A Vex-alien enforcer, his scaled skin bearing the distinctive markings of the Trading Consortium's security division. Eric felt Sora tense beside him, her fingers digging into his arm. You two look new, the Vex-alien said, his reptilian eyes scanning them with predatory interest, and familiar somehow. Just passing through, Eric replied evenly, shifting his stance subtly to place himself between Sora and the enforcer. The Vex-alien's tongue flicked out, tasting the air. The female, she smells like Alturian stock, premium merchandise. His gaze sharpened. Let me see your registration papers. Eric's hand drifted toward the makeshift weapon concealed at his waist. She's my bonded mate, not merchandise. The enforcer laughed, a harsh sound that drew attention from nearby tables. Humans and their peculiar attachments to property. The consortium doesn't recognize cross-species bonding with registered assets. She's not registered, Eric lied smoothly, and we're not looking for trouble. Then you won't mind a simple scan. The Vex-alien reached for a device at his belt. Before the situation could escalate further, a new voice interrupted. There you are. I've been waiting. A slender Vex-alien in civilian clothing approached, his demeanor markedly different from the enforcer's aggressive stance. He wore the simple attire of a merchant, lacking the military bearing of his compatriot. These are my clients, Hask, the newcomer said to the enforcer. I'd appreciate if you didn't harass them before we've concluded our business. The enforcer named Hask hesitated, clearly reluctant to back down. They matched the description of the traders I told you about, the civilian Vex-alien interrupted smoothly. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have matters to discuss. After a tense moment, Hask stepped aside with a final suspicious glance. Watch yourself, Nix. The consortium has increased patrols in this sector. Once the enforcer had returned to his drink, the Vex-alien named Nix gestured for Eric and Sora to follow him to a secluded booth. That was close, he said quietly. You two need to be more careful. The station's crawling with consortium agents since the slave transport incident. Eric studied him warily. Why help us? Because I recognize desperation when I see it. Nix leaned forward. And because I've been looking for a way off this station before my former employers realize I've deserted. Former employers? Sora asked. I was Security Division, Genetic Research Section, Nix replied, until I saw what they were doing to beings like you. His gaze lingered on Sora's covered forearm. The new genetic brands are just the beginning. Eric and Sora exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "We're looking for Dr. Elias Vorn," Eric said finally. Nix's expression shifted to one of surprise. "The geneticist? He's been off the grid for years." "But you know where he is," Sora pressed, sensing the Vexillian knew more than he was saying. Nix hesitated. "Perhaps, but that information comes at a price." "Name it," Eric said. "Passage off the rim, and protection when the consortium comes looking for me." Nix's scaled fingers tapped nervously on the table. "I know too much about their operations. If they find me, death would be a mercy." Eric considered their options. They needed a ship anyway, and having someone with inside knowledge of the consortium could prove invaluable. "Deal," he said finally, "but if you betray us—" "I won't," Nix interrupted. "We all want the same thing, freedom from the consortium." As they discussed details, Eric remained acutely aware of Sora beside him, her thigh pressed against his in the cramped booth. Each accidental touch sent a current of awareness through him, distracting him from the conversation. Sora seemed similarly affected, her breathing slightly faster whenever their hands brushed. The pretense of being a bonded pair was becoming less of an act with each passing hour. When they finally left the bar with coordinates to Dr. Vorn's supposed location and arrangements to meet Nix later for their departure, the tension between them was palpable. "Do you trust him?" Sora asked as they made their way through the station toward a merchant district to gather supplies. "About as far as I can throw him," Eric replied. "But he's our best lead, and he did save us from that enforcer." Sora nodded, her shoulder brushing his as they navigated the crowded corridor. "On my world, we have a saying. Sometimes the path to truth winds through gardens of deception. On Earth, we just say, keep your friends close and your enemies closer," Eric said with a half smile. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the bustling station around them seemed to fade away. The connection between them had grown from necessity to something deeper, something neither had anticipated, but both increasingly welcomed. "And what am I to you, Eric?" Sora asked softly. "Friend or enemy?" His answer was lost in the station's announcement system, blaring a security alert. Screens throughout the concourse flickered to life, displaying their faces alongside a substantial bounty offer. "Time to accelerate our plans," Eric said grimly, taking Sora's hand. "Let's find Nix and get off this station before every bounty hunter in the sector comes looking for us." They moved quickly through the crowd, their cover blown but their determination stronger than ever. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, bound not by genetic markers or pretense, but by a connection that was becoming increasingly difficult to deny. "This way!" Nix hissed, leading them through a narrow maintenance corridor that reeked of industrial lubricant and recycled air. "There's a private docking bay on level 3 used by smugglers. Security's minimal." Eric kept Sora close, one hand firmly clasped around hers, while the other held a compact pulse pistol he'd acquired during their hasty retreat from the bar. The station's alarm continued to blare, punctuated by announcements about the substantial reward for their capture. "How much further?" Sora asked, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "2 more junctions," Nix replied, his scaled skin glistening with exertion. "The access hatch ahead leads to a service elevator." They reached the hatch and Nix punched in a code. Nothing happened. He tried again, more frantically this time. "They've changed the sequence," he muttered. Eric gently moved him aside. "Allow me." He pulled a thin tool from his boot and inserted it into the manual override slot. With a few deft movements, the hatch clicked open. "Special Forces training has its perks." Nix looked impressed. "Humans and their mechanical aptitude. Fascinating." "Save the admiration for when we're safely off this station," Eric replied, though he couldn't help feeling a flutter of pride at Sora's appreciative glance. The service elevator was little more than a cargo platform with safety rails. It descended rapidly, the dim emergency lighting casting strange shadows across their faces. Eric found himself studying Sora's profile, the elegant curve of her neck, the determined set of her jaw. Even in danger, she carried herself with a dignity that stirred something profound within him. She caught him looking and held his gaze, a silent communication passing between them that needed no words. In that moment, Eric knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened, he would do anything to protect her. Not out of duty or principle, but because the thought of a universe without her had become unimaginable. The elevator jolted to a stop, breaking the moment. Nix cautiously opened the gate and peered out. "Clear for now," he whispered. "The docking bay is just ahead. Bay 7. They moved swiftly through the dimly lit corridor, passing sealed doors and abandoned equipment. The station's lower levels were clearly less maintained, with flickering lights and exposed conduits. "There," Nix pointed to a reinforced door marked with faded numerals. "That's our way out." Eric approached the control panel, but before he could override it, the door slid open. They froze, weapons raised. A small, rodent-like alien stared back at them, equally startled. It chittered something incomprehensible before darting past them and disappearing down the corridor. "Dock worker," Nix explained. "They won't raise an alarm. Too many illegal operations down here." They entered the docking bay and found themselves facing several small to mid-sized vessels of varying conditions. Most appeared to be smuggling ships, modified for speed and stealth rather than the comfort. "That one?" Nix indicated a sleek, dark craft near the far wall. "Tellurian design. Fast, well-armed, and the security system is relatively simple." "Relatively?" Sora asked. "For someone with Eric's talents," Nix replied with what passed for a smile among Vexillians. They approached the ship cautiously. Eric examined the external security panel, then set to work bypassing it. Sora stood watch while Nix gathered supplies from nearby storage containers. "Almost got it," Eric murmured, fingers dancing across the interface. The docking bay door suddenly slammed shut behind them, followed by the unmistakable sound of the locking mechanism engaging. "Company," Sora warned, spotting movement at the observation window above the bay. The enforcer from the bar, Hask, stared down at them, flanked by 2 armed guards. His reptilian features twisted into a triumphant snarl as he activated the bay's communication system. "Nowhere to run now," his voice echoed through the chamber. "The female is consortium property, and you two are worth more in custody than the bounty offers." Eric worked faster, sweat beading on his forehead. "Nix, how much time before they override the bay door?" "Minutes at most," the deserter replied, nervously eyeing the observation window. With a final adjustment, the ship's hatch opened with a pneumatic hiss. "In!" Eric commanded, covering their retreat as Sora and Nix scrambled aboard. He backed toward the ship, keeping his weapon trained on the bay door. Just as he reached the hatch, the door began to slide open, revealing Hask and his guards, weapons raised. "Start the engines!" Eric shouted as he dove inside, slamming his palm against the emergency close button. The hatch sealed just as pulse fire erupted across the bay. Nix was already in the pilot's seat, his 4-fingered hands flying across the controls with practiced efficiency. "Hold on!" he called as the engines roared to life. The ship lurched forward, breaking its docking clamps with a screech of tearing metal. Through the viewport, they watched Hask and his men scatter as the vessel swung around, its thrusters scorching the deck plating. "The bay doors are still closed," Sora pointed out, gripping a support rail as the ship shuddered. Nix bared his teeth in what might have been a grin. "Not a problem for this ship." He activated the weapon system, and twin energy beams lanced from the ship's forward cannons, blasting through the external bay doors. The sudden decompression created a powerful vacuum that sucked them out into space, along with everything else not bolted down in the bay. "That was," Sora began. "Effective," Eric finished, allowing himself a moment of relief as Helios Station rapidly diminished behind them. Nix plotted a course away from the station. "We should be clear of their sensor range in about 20 minutes. Then we can set course for Vorn's coordinates." Eric nodded, finally holstering his weapon. The adrenaline of their escape began to ebb, leaving him suddenly aware of how close he was standing to Sora in the ship's compact cabin. Her scent, that strange, sweet fragrance he'd noticed in the escape pod, seemed stronger now, more intoxicating. "You're injured?" she said softly, reaching up to touch his temple, where a thin trickle of blood had formed. "Just a scratch," he replied, but didn't move away from her touch. Her fingers lingered on his skin, the contact sending a current of awareness through both of them. In the artificial light of the ship's cabin, her eyes seemed to shift colors, from violet to a deep midnight blue that reminded Eric of Earth's oceans at dusk. "I should check the ship's systems," Nix announced, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the tension between his companions. "There are quarters below deck if you need to rest." He disappeared into the cockpit, leaving Eric and Sora alone in the main cabin. "We made it," Sora said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For now," Eric replied. "But we're one step closer to finding Vorn." She nodded, her hand dropping from his face, but not before trailing lightly down his jaw in a touch that could not be mistaken for merely clinical concern. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "I haven't done anything yet," he reminded her. "You're still branded." "But I'm not alone anymore." Her gaze held his, unwavering and intense. "On Alturia, we believe that true freedom begins in the mind and heart before it can manifest in the physical world." Eric found himself moving closer, drawn by something beyond conscious thought. "And are you free, Sora? In your mind and heart?" "More so with every moment I spend with you," she admitted, her amber skin flushing with a deeper hue. The ship hummed around them, carrying them deeper into the outer rim and toward an uncertain future. But in that moment, uncertainty seemed a small price to pay for the promise held in Sora's eyes. The abandoned mining colony of Taurus 4 hung in space like a forgotten relic, its once bustling facilities now silent and dark. Their ship approached cautiously, sensors scanning for any signs of active security systems or other vessels. "No life signs except for a small concentration in the northern quadrant," Nix reported from the pilot's seat. "Minimal power signatures, well shielded. Exactly what you'd expect from someone trying to stay hidden." Eric studied the colony's layout on the tactical display. "Any defenses we should worry about?" "Nothing active, but we should assume Vorn has safeguards in place." As they prepared for landing, Nix hesitated, his scaled fingers hovering over the controls. "There's something you both should know before we proceed." Sora and Eric exchanged glances. "I haven't been entirely forthcoming about the nature of your brand," Nix said, turning to face Sora. "It's not just a standard ownership marker." "What do you mean?" Sora asked unconsciously, touching her forearm where the iridescent pattern lay beneath her sleeve. "The consortium has been experimenting with advanced genetic modifications, creating specialized traits in their merchandise." Nix's discomfort with the term was evident. "Your particular brand contains markers for Project Helix, their most classified program." Eric's expression hardened. "What kind of modifications?" "Enhanced cellular regeneration, augmented neuroplasticity, and..." Nix paused. "Reproductive compatibility across species." The implications hung in the air between them. "They were breeding us," Sora said quietly, her voice steady despite the horror of the revelation. "Creating designer offspring with traits from multiple species." Nix nodded grimly. "The consortium discovered that Alturian genetic material is exceptionally adaptable. Your people can be modified to reproduce with nearly any humanoid species, creating offspring with selected traits from both lineages." Eric felt a surge of anger. "They're treating sentient beings like livestock." "Precisely," Nix confirmed, "and Sora's particular genetic sequence proved especially successful in trials. That's why the bounty on her is so high. She's not just an escaped slave, she's valuable intellectual property." Sora absorbed this information with remarkable composure, though Eric could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hands. "Does this change our objective?" she asked finally. "No," Eric replied firmly. "If anything, it makes finding Vorn even more crucial. He might be the only one who can remove these modifications along with the brand." Nix guided the ship into a landing approach, setting down in a sheltered hangar bay that had partially collapsed, providing natural camouflage from orbital scans. "We should move quickly," he advised. "The coordinates point to a research facility 2 kilometers north of here." They gathered supplies and weapons before disembarking. The colony's atmosphere was thin but breathable, the landscape barren and rocky. They moved in silence through abandoned structures, alert for any signs of danger. As they walked, Eric stayed close to Sora and acutely aware of her every movement. The revelation about her genetic modifications had added new complexity to the growing attraction between them, a fact neither acknowledged aloud, but both clearly felt. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly as they navigated through a collapsed tunnel. "I've spent 7 years as property," she replied. "Learning I was being genetically groomed for breeding isn't as shocking as it should be." Her matter-of-fact tone broke something in Eric's heart. He stopped, gently taking her arm to halt her progress. "It should be shocking," he said fiercely. What they did to you, what they're doing to countless others, it's an abomination. And I swear to you, Sora, we're going to put an end to it." The intensity in his voice seemed to catch her off guard. For a moment, her carefully maintained composure faltered, revealing the pain and vulnerability beneath. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, searching his face. "This isn't your fight." "It became my fight the moment I met you," he answered simply. Something shifted between them, a barrier dissolving, a connection deepening. Sora reached up, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with wonder, as if discovering something precious and unexpected. "On Alturia," she whispered, "we believe that souls recognize each other across lifetimes, that some connections transcend circumstance." Eric covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press his lips against her palm. The gesture, intimate and tender, spoke volumes that words couldn't express. "We should continue," Nyx called from ahead, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring their moment. They reluctantly separated, continuing their journey through the ruins. After another hour of careful navigation, they reached what appeared to be a sealed research facility built into the side of a crater. "This is it," Nyx confirmed, examining the security panel beside the reinforced door. "But someone's been here recently. These access codes have been changed." Eric inspected the area around the entrance. "Look at these marks. Forced entry, then resealed from the inside." "Consortium agents?" Sora suggested. "Possibly," Nyx agreed. "Or perhaps Vorn had visitors of another kind." Eric approached the door, studying the security system. "I can bypass this, but it'll take time." As he worked, Sora kept watch while Nyx examined the surrounding area more thoroughly. "Eric!" the Vexillian called suddenly, his voice tense. "You need to see this." They joined Nyx at what appeared to be a secondary entrance, partially concealed by debris. The door hung open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. "Blood!" Nyx pointed to dark stains on the threshold. "Not human. Not Alturian either." Eric drew his weapon. "Stay behind me." They entered cautiously, activating portable lights that cast long shadows through the abandoned facility. The interior was a maze of laboratories and research stations, equipment covered in dust except for areas where someone had clearly been working recently. "Look for anything related to genetic research," Eric instructed as they moved deeper into the complex. In the central laboratory, they found what they were looking for, and more. Sophisticated equipment hummed softly, still active. Holographic displays showed complex genetic sequences rotating slowly in 3 dimensions, and slumped in a chair before the main console was a body. "Dr. Vorn, I presume," Eric said grimly, approaching the fallen figure. The man was elderly, his white hair matted with blood from a wound to his temple, but as Eric checked for a pulse, the scientist's eyes fluttered open. "Not dead yet," Vorn croaked, "though they certainly tried." Sora rushed forward with a medical kit from their supplies. "Who did this to you?" "Consortium agents," the doctor replied weakly as she treated his wound. "They wanted my research on genetic debranding. When I refused, they took what they could and left me for dead." "When?" Eric demanded. "Yesterday." Vorne winced as Sora applied a regenerative patch to his injury. "They didn't find everything, though. My most important work is securely hidden." His gaze focused on Sora, noticing her for the first time. "You're Alturian, and you—" His eyes widened as they fixed on her covered forearm. "You carry their mark." "Yes," she confirmed. "Can you remove it?" A spark of interest animated the doctor's tired features. "Perhaps, but first, we need to secure this facility. They'll be back once they realize what they are missing." Eric helped the doctor to his feet. "What exactly are they missing, Doctor?" "Vorn." The scientist's expression was grim but determined. "The key to undoing everything the consortium has built. A way to not only remove their genetic brands, but to expose their entire operation to the Galactic Council." For the first time since their escape began, Eric felt a surge of genuine hope. He looked at Sora, whose eyes reflected the same cautious optimism. "Then let's get to work," he said. Dr. Vorn's laboratory hummed with activity as he prepared the equipment for Sora's procedure. Holographic displays flickered with complex genetic sequences, while diagnostic machines analyzed samples of her DNA. The consortium's genetic branding is brilliant, if utterly reprehensible, Vorny explained, studying the results. They've integrated the marker so thoroughly that conventional methods can't remove it without causing catastrophic cellular damage. Eric leaned against a workbench, arms crossed. But you have an unconventional method? Indeed. The doctor gestured to a chamber in the center of the lab. My debranding process uses targeted viral vectors to identify and neutralize the artificial genetic sequences. However, he hesitated. What aren't you telling us? Sora asked, her voice steady despite the anxiety Eric could sense beneath her composed exterior. Orn sighed. The process requires a genetic template, a baseline to guide the reconstruction of your original DNA, ideally from an unmodified Alturian, but finding one outside consortium control would be nearly impossible. So it won't work? Eric felt a crushing disappointment. I didn't say that, Vorn replied, his eyes moving between them thoughtfully. There's an alternative approach. The viral vectors can be programmed to recognize and preserve essential Alturian genetic markers while replacing the artificial sequences with compatible substitutes. Compatible substitutes, Sora repeated. Human DNA, Nix interjected from where he'd been monitoring the facility's security systems. He's talking about using human genetic material to replace the consortium's modifications. Eric straightened. DNA? Precisely, Warren confirmed. The procedure would effectively overwrite the consortium's brand with human genetic markers that aren't in their database and won't trigger their security systems. Would it change her? Eric asked, concerned. Physically, I mean. Minimally, if at all, Warren assured them. The procedure targets only the artificial sequences. She would remain Alturian in all essential aspects, but with subtle human genetic influences replacing the consortium's modifications. Sora considered this. So instead of being branded as consortium property, I would carry Eric's genetic signature. In a manner of speaking, yes, Vorn acknowledged, though nothing like the invasive control mechanisms the consortium employs. It would be more like a genetic echo. Eric and Sora exchanged a loaded glance. The intimacy of what Vorn proposed wasn't lost on either of them. There's more, the doctor added. The procedure requires genetic material that contains strong markers of individual identity, material with high concentrations of unique identifiers. Meaning? Eric prompted. Vorn looked uncomfortable. Reproductive cells would be ideal. They contain the most complete and concentrated genetic information. The implication hung in the air, charging the atmosphere between them. I'll give you two some privacy to discuss this, Vorn said tactfully, motioning for Nix to follow him into an adjacent room. When they were alone, Eric approached Sora, unsure what to say. The clinical nature of Vorn's explanation couldn't disguise the profound intimacy of what he was suggesting. This is unexpected, Eric finally managed. Sora's lips curved in a small smile. That may be the understatement of the century. Her attempt at humor broke the tension. Eric found himself smiling back, drawn once again to her remarkable resilience. You don't have to do this, she said softly. We could find another way. Is there another way? Nobody asked. She hesitated. Probably not in the time we have. The consortium will find us eventually. Eric took her hands in his, marveling at how natural it felt despite their physiological differences. Then the question isn't whether I'm willing, but whether you are. This is your body, Sora. Your identity. She looked down at their joined hands. On Alturia, we view genetic exchange as sacred, a blending of essences that transcends the physical. It's traditionally reserved for life-bonded pairs. I don't want to violate your cultural beliefs, Eric said, though the thought of walking away from her now seemed impossible. You wouldn't be, she assured him, meeting his gaze with newfound certainty. What the consortium did, that was the violation. This would be healing, reclamation. She paused, her eyes searching his. If it were anyone else, I couldn't consider it. But with you! The unfinished sentence contained volumes. Eric felt something expand in his chest, a warmth that had been growing since their first moments together in the escape pod. I've never felt this way about anyone, he admitted, human or otherwise. From the moment we escaped together, it's like I've been pulled towards you by something I can't explain." "I feel it too," she whispered. He reached up to trace the delicate markings along her temple, natural Alturian patterns, unlike the artificial brand on her arm. "Then let's do this. Not just to remove their brand, but because I want to be connected to you. Because whatever happens after this, I want part of me to always be with you." Sora's eyes glistened with emotion. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his in an Alturian gesture of profound intimacy. "In my culture, this means my soul recognizes yours." Eric closed his eyes, savoring the connection. "In mine, we do this." He tilted his head, bringing his lips to hers in a kiss that began tentatively, but quickly deepened as years of barriers, physical, cultural, species, dissolved between them. Her skin was warmer than a human's, her scent intoxicating in its alienness, yet the emotion flowing between them was achingly familiar. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, Sora's skin glowed with a subtle luminescence, an Alturian physiological response to intense emotion that made her appear almost ethereal. "That's new," Eric murmured, fascinated. She laughed softly. "There's much about each other we have yet to discover." The double meaning wasn't lost on either of them. With silent agreement, they moved toward the small quarters adjacent to the lab where they could find privacy. Hours later, they returned to the main laboratory where Vorn and Nyx waited discreetly. If either noticed the change in the air between Eric and Sora, the lingering touches, the private glances, the way they moved in unconscious synchronicity, neither commented. "We're ready," Eric announced. Vorn nodded, activating the procedure chamber. "The process will take approximately 6 hours. During that time, Sora will be unconscious while the viral vectors do their work." "And the success rate?" Eric asked. Theoretical until now," Vorn admitted, "but my simulations show an 87% probability of complete brand removal." "And the other 13%? Sora inquired calmly. The doctor's expression grew somber. "Partial removal at best, complete cellular rejection at worst." Eric felt a chill. "Meaning?" "Meaning I could die," Sora stated matter-of-factly. She turned to Eric, her expression serene despite the risk. "But I would rather die free than live as property." He wanted to argue to find another way, but the determination in her eyes stopped him. This was her choice, perhaps the first truly free choice she'd been able to make in 7 years. "I'll be right here," he promised as she prepared to enter the chamber. "The whole time," she smiled, touching his face one last time before stepping inside. "I know." As the chamber sealed and the procedure began, Eric settled in for the long wait, his thoughts filled with the woman who had so unexpectedly captured his heart across the stars. The chamber hissed open, releasing a cloud of vapor that dissipated to reveal Sora's still form. Eric rushed forward, heart pounding as Dr. Vorn checked her vital signs. "Her cellular structure is stabilizing," the doctor announced, studying the readouts. "The procedure appears to have been successful." Eric exhaled in relief. "When will she wake up?" "Soon. The sedation is already wearing off." As if on cue, Sora's eyelids fluttered. Eric took her hand, squeezing gently. "I'm here." Her eyes opened, and Eric gasped. The violet-blue hue he'd grown accustomed to had subtly changed, now containing flecks of earthy brown that mirrored his own eye color. "Eric," she murmured, her voice hoarse. "It worked," he told her, smiling. "The brand is gone." Dr. Vorn ran a scanner over her forearm where the iridescent pattern had been. The skin was now unmarked, showing only her natural amber tone. "Remarkable," the doctor muttered. "Complete integration of the replacement genetic material with no rejection." Sora sat up slowly, examining her arm with wonder. "I feel different." The procedure had some unexpected effects, Vorny explained, showing them the genetic analysis on a nearby screen. "Your DNA and Eric's have formed a unique bond, a genetic resonance I've never seen before." "What does that mean?" Eric asked. "It means you're connected on a fundamental level. The human genetic material didn't just replace the consortium's modifications. It synchronized with Sora's natural genetic structure in a way I didn't anticipate." Sora suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Your heart, it's racing." Eric blinked in surprise. How did you know that? I can feel it, she whispered, looking at him with astonishment. Not just know it, feel it as if it were my own. Vorn nodded, fascinated. Empathic resonance. The genetic bond has created a psychophysical connection between you. You may experience shared sensations, emotions, perhaps even thoughts to some degree. Is it permanent? Eric asked, not sure whether to be concerned or amazed. Most likely, the doctor replied, though the intensity may fluctuate with proximity and emotional states. Sora closed her eyes, concentrating. It's like a warm current flowing between us. I can sense your wonder, your concern. Her lips curved in a smile. Your affection. Eric felt it too, a gentle awareness of her presence that went beyond the physical, as if a part of his consciousness now extended to encompass hers. This is incredible, he murmured, helping her to her feet. As their skin touched, the connection intensified, sending a pleasant shiver through both of them simultaneously. Nyx cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. As fascinating as this development is, we have more pressing matters. The consortium will eventually track us here. He's right, Vorny agreed, moving to a secure terminal, which is why I've prepared this. The screen displayed thousands of files, research data, genetic sequences, and most importantly, evidence of the consortium's illegal operations. I've documented everything. The unauthorized genetic experimentation, the violation of sentient rights treaties, the bribes to Galactic Council officials. Vorn's expression was grim but determined. With this evidence and Sora as living proof of their crimes, we can bring down their entire operation. The Council will have no choice but to act, Nyx added. Even the most corrupt officials couldn't ignore such comprehensive evidence. Eric felt a surge of hope, amplified by the echo of Sora's own rising optimism through their new connection. We'll need to reach the Council directly, he said, bypass the usual channels that the consortium might control. I have contacts in the Resistance, Vorn replied. People who've been fighting the consortium from the shadows for years. They can get us an audience with Council representatives who aren't in the consortium's pocket. As they discussed strategy, Eric noticed Sora swaying slightly. Through their bond, he felt her exhaustion. The procedure had taken more out of her than she was letting on. You need rest, he said gently, guiding her to a chair. She didn't argue, which told him more than words how drained she truly was. Just for a moment, while Vorn and Nyx prepared the evidence for transmission to secure channels, Eric knelt beside Sora, taking both her hands in his. How does it feel, he asked quietly. To be free? She looked down at her unmarked arm, then back at him with eyes that now carried a piece of him within them. I'm not sure I fully believe it yet. For so long, that brand defined my existence, my limitations, my future. Her fingers tightened around his. And now instead, I carry you with me. The intimacy of her words struck him deeply. What had begun as a desperate bid for her freedom had transformed into something neither of them could have anticipated, a bond that transcended the physical. I can think of worse fate, he said with a small smile. So can I. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his in the Alturian gesture of soul recognition. Through their connection, he felt the depth of her emotion. Gratitude, yes, but also something much stronger, something that mirrored the feelings growing in his own heart. When this is over, Eric said, when the consortium is exposed and you're truly free to go anywhere, what then? The question hung between them, laden with possibility. On Alturia, she replied softly, when two beings share what we now share, they're considered joined in the deepest sense, what you might call soulmates. Her eyes met his, vulnerable yet certain. I would like to see Earth, the oceans you described, the forests, to build a life there with you. Eric felt his heart swell, the sensation doubling as it reflected back through their bond. I'd like that too. Their moment was interrupted by an urgent call from Nyx. We have incoming ships, consortium signatures, multiple vessels approaching fast. Vorny hurried to complete the data transmission. The evidence is uploading to my contacts. Even if they capture us, the truth will reach the Council. They won't capture us, Eric stated firmly, helping Sora to her feet. We've come too far to fail now. They moved quickly, gathering essential equipment and the backup copies of Vorn's evidence. Through their connection, Eric could feel Sora's strength returning as adrenaline coursed through her system, and something else, a fierce determination that matched his own. As they prepared to make their escape, Sora paused, looking back at the chamber that had freed her from her genetic brand. "Everything changed the moment you decided to help me," she said to Eric, one human who refused to accept that any sentient being should be treated like cattle. "It wasn't just me," he replied. "Your courage, Nyx's conscience, Vorn's brilliance, we all played a part. But it started with you," she insisted, "with your humanity." The facility's alert system blared as the first consortium ships entered orbit. Time was running out. "Let's finish what we started," Eric said, taking her hand. "Together." As they raced toward their ship, the genetic bond between them pulsed with shared purpose, and the promise of a future neither had dared imagine when they first escaped the slave transport. Sora was no longer branded property, but a free woman carrying the genetic signature of the man who had helped her reclaim her identity. Not as a mark of ownership, but as a symbol of their unique connection. And as they prepared to make their final stand against the consortium, both knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as equals, bound not by chains or genetic manipulation, but by something far more powerful: choice.